The State of Ethnic Studies in Seattle Public Schools. My name is Dr. Tracy Castro-Gill. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of Washington Ethnic Studies Now. Let's see. And we are joined by John Greenberg and some students from the NAACP Youth Council, and Liz Huizar, the executive director of SESEC. So John, NYC folks, and Liz, do you want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Yeah, I can go first. Well, just thank you for the invitation. As shared, my name is Liz. I'm the executive director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition and just an all-time supporter of ethnic studies. So excited to be here.
Hi, y'all. And I'm John Greenberg. I'm one of the co-founders and youth coordinators for the Washington NAACP Youth Council and a big advocate for ethnic studies as well.
Any NYC youth who want to introduce yourselves? You don't have to, Oh, they can't, right? Because I haven't made them. So, okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. John, can you call out the folks whose names you recognize that are here?
I'm doing this on my phone because I'm kind of out of commission right now, so I can't see the list, or I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this.
All right, I apologize for that. I don't know how to work around that, but this is the first webinar I've done with Google Meet, so I apologize. Okay, so real quick with a broad history of ethnic studies for those that don't know. It's an initiative that started in the 1960s with student strikes and walkouts all across the United States, and led largely by Black student unions and the Third World Liberation Front. And while it was largely at university colleges, there were high school actions as well, where high school students walked out. But if you want a solid foundation for the history of when ethnic studies began, or advocacy for ethnic studies began, I highly suggest the documentary Agents of Change, and that'll give you a look at what was happening in San Francisco and different universities on the East Coast. The most recent push for ethnic studies that we're in right now can arguably be traced back to the Tucson Unified School District, when a very successful Raza Studies, ethnic studies program was shut down. And students protested it, and a documentary came out of that called Precious Knowledge. So if you want a history of more contemporary ethnic studies movements, that's also a great documentary. We are Washington Ethnic Studies Now, so we're gonna watch a video. It's just an introduction to who we are as Washington Ethnic Studies Now, how we define it, and how youth we have worked with, some of them former NYC students, have been impacted by ethnic studies. So let's watch the video.
When I'm in an ethnic studies class, I feel very liberated.
I felt like I belonged. For me, it was like staring into a mirror.
It's so important to be able to see ourselves.
To be able to feel comfortable and confident.
Finding community and connection.
Uplifting each other and empowering each other.
Ethnic studies, it is counsel, it's therapy, it's life.
The vision of Washington Ethnic Studies Now is ethnic studies in every K-12 classroom of Washington State, taught by anti-racist educators, committed to centering the histories and lived experiences of people of color.
We provide professional development to educators. We also work on the legislative side to advocate for educational policy that educators get trained in ethnic studies.
We're committed to teaching each other and challenging each other. And we don't shy away from the difficult conversations. We tackle it head on together.
When we're teaching ethnic studies at its best, our students are coming away with a sense of empowerment that we wished we had when we were younger.
Ethnic Studies provides a facilitated and safe and welcoming space to explore ideas, understandings, and misunderstandings about different people and different cultures.
It's an opportunity for a student to see the greatness that their people have brought to the world, and for them to relate to that greatness and feel great and feel excited about bringing that same greatness into a new generation. students can see each other and understand each other.
The sense of oneness and community that I built up with all the other students that were there, it was really special.
At the heart of ethnic studies is love for humanity and love for one another.
Afterwards, I really noticed I had a lot of growth and I'm way more outspoken.
Ethnic studies really do benefit the soul, the mind, and the person as a whole.
For students to have educators that see them and hear them and actually recognize their voice,
it can be a great feeling.
Life-changing, really.
There are so many positive outcomes to ethnic studies. Graduation rates, attendance rates increase with students who have just one ethnic studies course because their humanity is affirmed in these spaces and that school becomes a place that they want to be.
We need ethnic studies in our classes to foster a space where we really want to be able to learn.
If you truly care about the well-being of your students, ethnic studies is a no-brainer.
This work is so important. It impacts everybody.
We are different peoples and we come from so many different backgrounds. We all need to acknowledge and all need to realize that we're strong, we're powerful, we're capable, and any walls that come our way, we can tear them down.
Our classrooms in our country are becoming more and more diverse, not less. And our students want and deserve more that represents them, that speaks to them and to their lived experiences. It gives me hope that we really are going to be able to pass on a better world to future generations.
The story of America can be a very beautiful story where we decided that the world needed to change, and then we changed. And that includes all of us.
Okay, thank you. So that it's really cool to watch it because it was made a couple of years ago by one of our funders, College Spark, and Asuka, who is part of the video, is now employed by WAESN as our Director of Development and Programs. She is one of the people speaking, and their partner Onyx is thinking about joining the board now. So, and another student, Laura, is working with our summer programming. So it's really cool to see them and to have them still involved in WAESN. So that's nice. And so I'm going to hand it over to Liz for a little bit, who's just going to talk about her background in ethnic studies and why it's important to her and her communities.
Thank you. So just kind of sharing a personal history and a reason for why all of this work is so significant. And so I went to school in California, a place that, like here, has a lot of communities of color that attend school but aren't always visible in the curriculum. I remember growing up and so many times wondering, well, where's my community in the work that we were doing? And I was lucky because I still found a way to keep myself connected. And the first ethnic studies class I ever took was a college course my third year of my undergrad, which felt like way too late. It felt like, why am I barely exploring this history? And so that really solidified for me the necessity to put this in front of students much earlier. One of the things that I got to watch was Precious Knowledge, and that really just kind of awoke my interest in if these strategies work, if graduation is improving, if students feel more connected, if parents feel more engaged, then why would we not universally implement this? And of course, the critical consciousness that folks were receiving is a threat to the status quo that we live in this system. And so I saw why people opposed it, but it also felt like a bigger purpose of, so then let's talk about the benefits, right? So that aside, my master's degree is in Mexican American Studies with the focus on education policy. And a lot of it was exploring how we develop policies that then reflect the needs and the things that we're hearing from students. And one of the things I know from working in California to working in present day is students want to see themselves in the curriculum. They want to see their stories. They want to be able to connect. At Seattle Public Schools, the closest thing that I got to experience that helped kind of fold some of ethnic studies in was Proyecto Saber, a project that was hosted with community member organizations in Chief South. It was at one point at Ballard and then also at Denny. And that space was so significant, bridging community to your own stories, to the local history, to the history of the students in that space. And yet what we started to see was, again, the unraveling of a program that worked so well. And so all that to say that like for me, the question is often, why do we roll back strategies that work and try to reinvent the wheel? Because ethnic studies has been proven time and time again to be a curriculum that is intersectional. It is not one class that should be by itself, but rather it should be integrated through our entire curriculum. And then we can see true significant outcomes for our students. And so again, my journey with ethnic studies is personal. I myself was a student and I got to teach for a little bit when I was in California, a college course at the high school campus. And just again, the ability to place that in front of students creates so much change. Like now they're affirmed in different things that they might not have experienced. And so the last thing I'll say is, from our babies in elementary all the way through high school, ethnic studies makes sense. And it's not just one class that you add to your roster, but how do we make sure that this is part of the overall growth of our young people. And so I know I went in a lot of loops, but I hope that gives you a little piece of why I'm so proud to support ethnic studies and happy to be here sharing a little bit of the work that I'm doing. So passing it back to you, Tracy.
Thank you. And I want to share, John, let me know who of the NYC are here. So I want to shout them out and apologize in advance if I say your name wrong. Oluchi, Mbui, Catalina, and Monique are all here from the NAACP Youth Council. So thank you for that. Okay. So going back to what Liz was saying, you know, Washington Ethnic Studies now, we started out as a group of educators who were working in largely SPS doing ethnic studies, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we had to wrestle with how to make ethnic studies accessible in grades K through 12. When SPS first adopted ethnic studies resolution, the first thing they did was have a listening session from the community. And there were basically 3 mandates that that the community gave us to move forward. And one was K-12. They didn't want it only in high school. The other one was that they didn't want to use like corporate textbooks. They wanted locally developed curriculum. And the last one was that they wanted it to be interdisciplinary. So they didn't want a standalone ethnic studies course. So one of the first things we did as a group that was tasked with developing the program is we looked at different models. So you have the traditional model of ethnic studies that you often see at the university level. It includes critical pedagogy, but the courses are often centered on different racialized and ethnic groups. So you'll have Africana studies, Asian American studies, American Indian studies. That only works at the university level because students have options to choose, right? There's way more flexibility at the university level than K-12 and zero flexibility really in K-5. They don't really get electives. And so we looked at a model called pan-ethnic studies. It also includes critical pedagogy, and it's more flexible to be interdisciplinary, which is what the community was telling us that they wanted. And so it focuses on intersectionality, it focuses on anti-colonial discourse and anti-racist pedagogies. And so really, I say the difference between the two is traditional ethnic studies zooms in on specific groups of people, and pan-ethnic studies zooms out onto systems. And when we zoom out onto systems, we can really analyze any identity or any intersections of identity or multiplicities of identity and understand how the system is impacted by them or how they are impacted by the system, right? And so I just want to make that clear that that's the type of ethnic studies Washington Ethnic Studies Now has consistently advocated for, and that grew out of those listening sessions back in 2017. So as a result, Washington Ethnic Studies Now has developed curriculum frameworks that are student-centered, that positions educators as learners, not just the keepers of all knowledge. It's asset-based because we found that a lot of people who thought they were teaching ethnic studies were focusing on what we have coined trauma porn, where all they do is focus on the oppression and the negative aspects of history and not positive history of different people and different ethnicities. It's cyclical, iterative, and critical. So we don't start at point A and get to point B and then call it done, right? We revisit all of these things in the circle and how they play off of one another. And then it's flexible and responsive. So for example, a lot of people say, well, how do I teach ethnic studies to a class full of white students? And I say, well, you teach them what it means to be white, right? Because if we're doing pan-ethnic studies and we're looking at a systems level approach, what does it mean to be white? We can argue that we teach white history, which statistically and factually from research is true, but that doesn't mean that we teach white students what that means for them, for their identities and how they move through the world. And so ethnic studies has to be flexible and responsive to the current dynamics, the current political dynamics, and the racial makeup of your classroom. And we also emphasize pedagogy, which is the how you teach, over the what you teach. Because if you have the strategy and the skill down, literally anything that can become an ethnic studies lesson, if you have the skills. So we developed frameworks for different content areas and grade levels, because again, it's interdisciplinary. And we use these frameworks when we provide professional development for educators and districts. A lot of school districts, I think we work with about 15 schools in Seattle Public Schools right now who have had access to these frameworks and training, mostly in South Seattle. In the video, Amanda mentioned that we do political advocacy. Our biggest push right now is to develop a K-12 ethnic studies endorsement. Oliver's on the call and he had a big play in that. And we did get some movement a couple of legislative sessions ago where PESB, the Professional Education Standards Board, was instructed by the legislature to begin the process of figuring out how to do this K-12 endorsement. So the QR code, the first thing we did was we wrote a policy brief. Oliver and I worked on that. And then we did a pilot with PESB on what that training would look like. And out of that training came a research paper that the QR code will take you to, that was published last summer on implementing ethnic studies in Washington State. And it was based on that pilot that we did. And so we got some good data from that. And we are seeing movement on that. In fact, tomorrow I'm meeting with Vero Velez and Brooke Brown, who co-authored the OSPI Ethnic Studies Framework with me. And we're meeting tomorrow to talk about facilitating that work at PESB starting soon. So legislative efforts are paying off finally. Okay, so that was WAESN. That's what we do, just so you know. Ethnic Studies in Seattle Public Schools, a brief history. Actually, this is how I met John. And he was working with a group of leaders from the King County NAACP, and the woman on the bottom right is Rita Green. And at the time, she was the education chair for the King County NAACP, and I think she still is the chair for the Washington State. It's like Washington, Oregon, and Alaska NAACP. And so they were working on drafting a resolution to demand that SPS bring ethnic studies into Seattle, and that was in 2016. And I was brought on as a teacher who taught 6th grade because the other 2 teachers, John and Tess, were high school. And so I could speak to the younger students. And then John and what would become the NAACP Youth Council led some school board protests and what do you call them? Mobilizations, that's the word. School board mobilizations to push the NAACP resolution. And then you can see here on July 5th, the school board unanimously passed their own resolution in support of ethnic studies. And that's what led to the community listening groups. And so that happened over the summer of July 2017. And then somehow I got put in charge of the program. So I think it was because, if I remember correctly, and John can correct me, but the way I remember it is John and I were sitting in a room with at least a half a dozen district leaders, like chiefs and executive directors, a bunch of different people. And they were like, well, how do we do this? And John's like, that's what you guys are supposed to know, right? Like, you're the district leaders. And I was like, well, why don't we do this? And they just rolled with it, right? And then somehow I was put in charge. And so I was also working with the Seattle Education Association with a bunch of amazing educators. And I put together this group, which became the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group. And we ended up writing the curriculum for the first Black Lives Matter at School Week and the initial ethnic studies frameworks, which later became the WAESN frameworks that I shared with you earlier. Okay, briefly, ethnic studies in Washington State, because since that happened, most of the movement has been at the state level and not at the SPS level. In fact, the state has been moving forward while the district has been moving backwards. So in 2022, there had already been 2 pieces of legislation passed at the state level that suggested an ethnic studies curriculum in grades K-12. And that directed OSPI to create a state model curriculum for ethnic studies. And out of that came the Washington State Ethnic Studies Frameworks, written by those of us whose names are on the screen. And if you scan the QR code, that'll take you to the OSPI framework. We were all femmes of color and none of us were paid. So that also tells you a little bit about the extractive nature of a lot of the SPS, or a lot of the ethnic studies work happening both at district and state levels. But I wasn't mad at what we ended up producing. They wanted us to produce units and lessons. And again, we said, no, we're going to focus on the pedagogy. We're going to focus on how prepared are you to teach ethnic studies. And if you go to the framework, it even has a little like self-assessment rubric for the teacher, the school administrator, the district administrator, etc. Like, how prepared are you and what steps do you need to take to become more prepared? And then the State Board of Education adopted a resolution to support graduation requirements. And WAESN was heavily involved in that. We consulted with them. We provided training for them to help them move from thinking about ethnic studies as a standalone elective to an interdisciplinary course. And that's the interdisciplinary language is what they ended up using in their resolution. It's been put on hold largely because we asked them to put that on hold because the infrastructure hasn't been built. There's no requirement. There's no, teachers don't have to prove that they have the skills or the knowledge to teach ethnic studies as long as they have an endorsement. So like in social studies, ELA, whatever, they can teach ethnic studies. As we know, a lot of those teachers cause more harm than good because they haven't been adequately trained. And that's what my research paper discovered as well. Okay, how are we on time? Okay, good. So I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A at the end. Ethnic studies in Seattle Public Schools, where we are now. So I'm going to kind of, Larry Nyland was the superintendent in 2017 when we were successful in getting the school board to adopt a resolution of their own in support of ethnic studies. He codified ethnic studies into SPS strategic plan, the superintendent's strategic plan, which linked funding to support ethnic studies because it was specifically named as the as one of the strategies, right? And then I became the program manager. So I left the classroom and went to the district to build the program that we started when I was in the classroom. Then Denise Juneau became the superintendent, and she removed ethnic studies from the superintendent's strategic plan, which effectively removed access to funding. So under Larry Nyland, we had limited funding. Like I couldn't hire people to support me. It was literally just me and then the group of volunteer teachers that was the ethnic studies advisory group that was working on ethnic studies. But when Denise Juneau came in, she totally removed any access to funding through redesigning the strategic plan. And then she removed me as the program manager because she didn't like that I was angry about it. Yeah, and then she got removed. Actually, because of that. And we have Brent Jones. So Brent Jones initially provided funding for the program. Alexander Ray was hired to replace me. And at one point he had 2 staff. So he did have some support for like writing curriculum, going out to schools, doing professional development, supporting educators who wanted it, partnering with community organizations, which was all the things that I was doing as well. However, after a couple of years, his funding was completely removed. And this past April, he left the district because he had 0 support, 0 funding. And in fact, there were people who were actively hostile towards him and ethnic studies like they were towards me and ethnic studies when I was there. So we have Ben Schuldner, who I've met with several times, and I don't have anything negative to say about him yet. I hope that he's been responsive. I hope he continues to be responsive, and I plan to meet with him again. And so I've just been working with him on defining ethnic studies, how we have defined it in SPS and how the state is defining it. Because when I first asked him, how do you understand ethnic studies? He said heroes and holidays, the old multiculturalism thing. And so I've been trying to tell him that, you know, in Seattle, we take the critical pedagogy approach, anti-racist, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully he's hearing that message. But we have, you know, a lot of people focus on the superintendents and the turnover from superintendents, and they're ignoring the staff at the district level, right? So I want to touch on that for a moment because the superintendent has changed, but the staff remains, right? So Kayla Perkins is one of the people that you should know about in Seattle Public Schools if you're going to advocate for ethnic studies. He co-manages curriculum assessment and instruction with Cashel Toner. Typical white man, he wants to do good, but he hasn't taken the time to explore his privilege and biases. Would often say things like, I know this might be racist, but, and then go ahead and say the racist thing, right? So he's in charge of curriculum and instruction, along with Cashel Toner, who I could not find a picture of. Cashel Toner is a white woman. She manages with Kayla Perkins, and she has been the leader behind improving first grade reading goals for Black boys for over a decade and has continuously failed to improve the reading scores for Black children in general, but still manages to keep her job. She was when I was there, she was very anti-ethnic studies. thinly veiled threats against me and against ethnic studies, but she's still in charge, right? The biggest concern is that now that there's no ethnic studies program manager, that in order to save money, the ethnic studies program will be handed to a different program manager, most likely Kathleen Vasquez. Kathleen Vasquez is the current social studies and ELA program manager, and ethnic studies gets pushed into those two subjects the most often. However, Kathleen has been very anti-ethnic studies since 2017 when I worked with her. She has been known to say very conservative things like No Child Left Behind was the best legislation for literacy. And we should all know that No Child Left Behind was a horrible Bush 2 administration piece of legislation that was very anti-public education, in my opinion. And she did a presentation to the board on how she wanted to, quote, decolonize social studies using Common Core standards, which is, that just demonstrates her profound misunderstanding of what decolonize means. And so one of the biggest concerns is that she will be handed control of ethnic studies programs in Seattle public schools, and we don't want that. So when we think about challenges, budget constraints, obviously, because the new superintendent has to figure out how to cut, and the board have to figure out how to cut millions of dollars. Another challenge is translating stated support into long-term infrastructure like staffing, professional development, all of those things that we need to make sure educators are ready to teach this. The people in charge don't really acknowledge ethnic studies as a legitimate field of study instead of a side project for students of color. And a lot of ethnic studies scholars, myself included, say white students need it more than anybody. There's a lack of support for locally developed curricula. There's not a mechanism at the district level to do that, only for like corporate developed curriculum. And like I said, the community told us explicitly they don't want that. As I said, the current district staff's lack of skill and expertise, the current staff's history of hostility or indifference towards ethnic studies, their inability to envision the systemic impact of ethnic studies, which I argue would solve the problem of budget constraints. Because if you understand ethnic studies as systemic implementation and not just a program, you are folding it into every single program that you're doing, not a standalone program that requires extra funding. And so there's a lack of vision and a lack of skill at the district staff level. And then we have interference from racist lobbyists like FAIR. And that's why this webinar is called No Fair. I've been contacted by somebody who told me that FAIR, a nonprofit organization that stands for Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, has contacted Superintendent Schuldner, explicitly targeting me and Washington Ethnic Studies Now, saying that our curriculum is problematic and divisive. And they've presented their alternative to, quote, ethnic studies. This QR code will take you to a blog post I wrote about FAIR and their ethnic studies curriculum. If you go to their website, their curriculum is very colorblind. People are human. They're not Black. They're not Asian. They're not looking like, we're all the same, kumbaya kind of thing. And their curriculum is developed by mostly PhDs, but they're all white, and none of them have a background or expertise in ethnic studies, which is very problematic. Nothing about us without us. And so we have, I've testified at the school board about this issue, and I have a meeting soon with Superintendent Schuldner to also bring this up, that, this is not the ethnic studies we fought so hard for back in 2017. Don't let us roll back even further than we already have, right? So I kind of rushed through everything because nobody stopped me. So we're at the Q&A section. So if anybody, including John, Liz, Jasmine, anybody, like, if anybody has questions, let us know and we'll try to answer them as best as we can. Yeah, Jasmine, you want to introduce yourself since you're on the chat?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Lee. I am the Director of Communications and Member Engagement. Am I getting that right? I don't have my title in front of me. And yeah, I worked at WAESN with Tracy, and I just started less than 2 months ago, so I'm still learning the ropes, but diving right in and just here to support this work.
I think one thing I kind of glanced over is I said that you would lead with resources to support ethnic studies, and it's just implied that the resources would be these types of things, like the blog posts, the who's in charge of what, how we've defined ethnic studies, what the state's doing, right? The state OSPI framework. So all of those things are things that you can take to your school board or use to educate yourself about how we have defined and envisioned ethnic studies in Seattle Public Schools for 2 years now. I think, John, jump in if you have something to say about that, because it's very disheartening that 10 years after we got the school board to pass their resolution, ethnic studies is virtually non-existent in SPS.
Tracy, we have a question in the chat. Do you want me to read it?
Okay. Let me go back.
This is from Evan.
Oh.
It says, hi, thank you for this presentation. What is the overlap between ethnic studies and JMSTI curriculum? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that, so I don't know if I'm saying that.
That's the sense of time immemorial.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah, so actually, I was just talking to Willard Bill, who up until recently was the Native education person at OSPI, and we had a long conversation about that because the state, when they first passed their legislation to suggest K-12 ethnic studies, they included Native American education in that, and the representatives from the 29 tribes asked to be removed because they don't consider themselves an ethnicity. They consider themselves tribal sovereignties, and they see their goal for liberation as sovereignty and not equality, which is what most other folks of color and communities of color are advocating for. That's not to say that they are incompatible. So, you know, what Willard and I ended up saying is they're parallel, right? They complement one another, and there's no reason why one has to override or overshadow the other. They can work in tandem. Does that answer your question, Evan? I would say that's unique to Washington State, and every other state that I've learned about that's doing ethnic studies, it includes Native American studies.
Oh, Evan, message. It says I can't unmute.
Let me see if I can fix that.
Oh, more message. But yes, I have more thoughts, but we can talk later.
Tracy, what would you say is the hope right now? Like what's the call to action that we're wanting to put out there?
I think the most pressing need is to convince men not to work with FAIR. They are racist. Even it's a foundation against intolerance and racism. Again, if you read my blog post or you go onto their website, they're bragging about how they've funded lawyers to support all these white men who are filing reverse discrimination lawsuits and supporting legal wins for white men who are challenging DEI programs. And so, you know, their rhetoric is very ingenious because they're co-opting our language. But if you look past the rhetoric, it's very clear that they are a racist organization. And so I think that's the most immediate need, is to help Ben understand what we mean, the folks of color, the students and the educators who push for ethnic studies, what we mean when we say ethnic studies. And so that's why I shared with you the state framework and the State Board of Education information, because that's all included. Like, he doesn't have to believe us, you know, listen to State Board, listen to OSPI.
Tracy, we have another question in the chat. Do you want me to read it or do you want to just look at it?
Can you please read it? Because it's
Yes.
hard for me to switch around.
Yes. This is from Oliver. Any insight on SB 5574, NAACP and Black Studies Bill from this session? It didn't pass, but I remember from years back that it was introduced by a national group and isn't connected to ethnic studies.
Yes, Oliver, are you talking about the Make Us Visible stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I haven't been paying much attention to that because I've been focusing so much on WAESN has grown exponentially over the past 6 months. And so I've been really focused on that, but I'm glad to hear that it didn't pass, because there's a national group, like Oliver said, called Make Us Visible. Again, they're kind of like fair in that they're co-opting our language, but really pushing for a model minority myth for Asian Americans that is excluding other groups of color, and even sometimes overstepping the political advocacy of other groups of color.
I don't know if you can see, Tracy, John has his hand raised.
Oh, I can't see. Go ahead, John.
But I also saw there was a question in the chat we could get to first.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Okay, this is from Abigail. It says, you mentioned integrating ethnic studies into everything instead of viewing it as a separate program. In some schools, 12th grade English will now be randomly assigned, like Asian women, Asian literature, and Black women literature. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on how this is correlated.
Yeah, there's actually a funny story about this. When Denise was superintendent, I had to go on medical leave because I was being treated so poorly by her administration that it affected my mental health. And so while I was on medical leave, my boss, Diane DeBacker, who was friends with Denise, was trying to pass off courses like Black literacy, Asian American literacy as ethnic studies. And so again, ethnic studies isn't multiculturalism. Black women literature and Asian American women literature can be ethnic studies, and it can be just literature, right? If it doesn't have that critical pedagogy component where you are actively scrutinizing and analyzing systems of power and intersectionality, then it's just literature, right? It's great that you're reading authors of color, but it's not necessarily ethnic studies. And so while Diane DeBacker in the school meeting that I was watching on YouTube was saying those things, I was texting the director, Liza Rankin, saying, that's not ethnic studies. To get them titled ethnic studies. That's why they're currently not titled ethnic studies. The other problem is, like I mentioned before, any teacher with a literacy endorsement can teach those courses. Doesn't mean they're qualified to teach about race or racism or ethnic studies. So I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about integration or interdisciplinary ethnic studies. Yes, that's what we want. And we have to make sure it actually meets the criteria. And there are frameworks. In the research paper that I shared the QR link to, I used a framework called Tiahui, which was developed by the educators who taught in the Tucson Ethnic Studies program. So there are peer-reviewed frameworks that outline the criteria necessary to teach ethnic studies.
There's one more question. Do you want to go, John, or should I ask the question or read the question first?
For the questions, those are great.
Okay. This is from Oliver. Have y'all been in conversation with the State Board of Education about ongoing changes to the profile of a graduate to include ethnic studies?
No, but I think that we need to pick that conversation back up again, because I think the state board is going in, and I think it's very compatible with ethnic studies, especially a systemic approach to ethnic studies. So that is on my radar to rejoin that conversation, because I know, Oliver, when you were working with us, we had begun that conversation. So in the future, hopefully in the fall.
Is this a good time to jump in?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna, Tracy, I really appreciate you putting all this together, and it's just a wealth of information and history that I think a lot of us forget. I mean, I feel like people in Seattle forgot that SPS lost the Supreme Court case to try to integrate our schools. Like, not so many long years after that happened, back in, the Supreme Court decided in 2007. But I think our institutional memory tends to be very short. And given that there's a school board director here, I'm reminded that there were no school board directors currently serving, that there are no current school board directors who are part of passing the resolution of support back in July of 2017. So you did mention that there's some high level executives, highly paid as well, like who have stayed on across many administrations, but there's also this huge amount of turnover. And I'm also reminded of I don't really hear what they're doing right now, but there's a Department of Racial Equity Advancement, DREA, which used to be DERR, Department of Equity and Race Relations, and I just was working with them over the years. I've just seen they often don't know what has been happening before them, so there's just not a lot of continuity, because there's so much turnover in some of these, especially I'd say in anti-racist positions, because as you learned it, there's just so much pressure to not do that work, even in a district that has all the racial equity rhetoric. So I just think that there's just needs. I feel like the fight is never over, in that we just have to keep educating every new school board member and keep showing up at school board meetings saying this is what the community wants. And it's a continual education process, but codifying it, like you mentioned, with I think it was Larry Nyland's strategic goal that had what he was he was in part evaluated by the school board on his ability to implement ethnic studies, and that was just so helpful. And again, all that gets lost with a new superintendent and a new school board. So we were talking about what's the call to action. I feel like we need to keep communicating with our school board directors about the importance of this, but then just a continual education, because so much gets lost from year to year.
Yeah, and one thing that I hear often from school board directors, and I understand this, working as in a nonprofit, we have the same structure of the board and the executive director, which basically functions like a superintendent. We can't, they say we have no say over personnel issues. Yes. And you manage and do have say over the superintendent. So why aren't you holding him accountable for his staff not meeting standards or not having the necessary skills, right? Why is Cashel Toner, she's been promoted several times while actively failing to raise the literacy rates of Black students? She's being rewarded for that, right? So why isn't the superintendent, who is her ultimate boss, being held accountable for that by the board? So they're not holding Cashel accountable, they're holding the superintendent accountable for not meeting the goal. And that just happens to be Cachel's job, right? So I don't understand why the board hasn't, why they don't see that.
We have Evan raising her hand.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm actually at a kids swim meet right now, so it's really loud here. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I totally agree with you, Tracy. I think that's just like a governance issue that we have been there a lack of common understanding around what our actual role is and what levers we do have. But you're absolutely right that our main lever and mechanism is accountability of the superintendent. That's our actual role. And I know I'm also the Tribal Nations liaison this year and have been in many conversations with the IPAC about specifically the curriculum and instruction department obstructing efforts to implement JML STI as well. And so this is clearly a problem. And I do think that Ben is responsive. I mean, he's got a lot of fires to put out, obviously, right now. But I also just wanted to say one of the things, the lack of funding that was mentioned earlier, and how that's a barrier. I'm curious if you have ever been able to present at SLI or the new teacher orientations. I feel like I've just been in conversation with the Native Ed department about that being sort of like a cost-effective, efficient way to reach a lot of educators and building leaders all at once. That doesn't cost any money. It's just allocation of time, basically, and that these things need to be prioritized at these events. So I don't know if you've talked to Ben about that, or if that's something that you've done in the past, but just wanted to throw that out as something to think about.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him about it. I did present at both when I was program manager for SPS. But I'm willing to talk again. I know there's only a couple, maybe 2 or 3 principals who, I don't know how to say this diplomatically. Denise, ruled with an iron fist. And if you opposed her in any way, she responded very harshly. And so she was anti-ethnic studies. And even though I spoke at SLI, a lot of the district or building administrators were reluctant to do anything because of that. And so I have talked to Ben about that, right? About the toxicity, the toxic culture. It's so horrible at the district, and the fighting over resources and funding and possessiveness of programs, and that prevents the collaboration and working together that should be happening. And so I'm more than happy. Like, I'm offered to do it for free, right? Like, you can have to pay me. I'm offered to meet with the board. To just kind of go over some of the things I've gone over today and talk about how we can think of ethnic studies differently in a way that wouldn't necessarily require extra funding, right? It's just a shifting of how you view curriculum and instruction, and who's in charge, right? The right people have to be there.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to thank you again, Tracy, for putting this together, because I have personally asked many times for an update and understanding of what I obviously wasn't on the board at the time the resolution was passed, and I know that there's just been so much chaos and turmoil. I mean, I experienced that from a parent perspective in the district for many years, and I have never been able to get a straight answer from anybody about where things currently stand with ethnic studies at all. So I was really interested in participating in this call tonight, because I really just wanted to know, start to finish, like what the deal is here, and where are we currently, and how did we end up here? So I just want to thank you for putting this together, and I think I'll certainly pass along. I mean, you said this was being recorded, so I can, if there's a link, I'm happy to share it with my fellow board directors and encourage everybody to listen, so that we all have a shared understanding forward.
Yeah, I'll once it's like finished processing or whatever, I'll upload it onto our YouTube channel, and then I'll share the link.
Tracy, we have some comments, and then it's not a question, but I ask. It's John says, Tracy, share about the training series that you and Margarita developed. Excuse me. Sorry, Marquita.
Yeah. So Marquita was the director for the Center for Racial Equity, which is part of SCA, and it has a different name now, and I don't know what the new name is, but she's who I was working with that allowed me to network with all the educators who become the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group. And the first thing we talked about as the advisory group was teachers need training. And so I think we had a really robust collaboration between SEA, the Ethnic Studies Program, the Professional Development Program Manager, Laura Vanderplow, I think. We brought in different groups of educators who were doing different siloed things, and we brought them together to create a comprehensive training on culturally responsive teaching, which is what Laura Vanderplow was leading, racial equity literacy, which was what Marquita was leading, and ethnic studies, which is what I was leading. And we combined it. And that's what ended up being that really successful summer institute that we had, I think in 2019, where 100+ educators came down during their summer break for 2 entire weeks to the John Stanford building. We even had teachers from other districts joining us. We charged them like a small registration fee to help cover the costs. But over 100 educators for 2 entire weeks came down to take that series. And then we started taking that series out into schools that asked for it and doing the training. And that all disappeared when I was pushed out. And so once I started Washington Ethnic Studies Now, I created another version of that. And I believe a better version of that because, since that time I've earned my PhD, I've done a lot of research, I've had some time under my belt. And so I have a new series that was kind of the pilot for. And that's when I say I've worked with about 15 schools in Seattle, that's the training that they went through. Yeah, I would argue that that was like the best collaborative effort in the district at the time, and maybe even since then. Okay, it's 7:03, and I want to respect everybody's time. So if there are no further questions, I am going to say thank you to you all for joining us. I'll send a link to the video when it's ready, and thank you for Jasmine for helping me facilitate, and thank you to John and Liz for helping me plan for this and get the idea for this. Oh, let me just say, clarify, call to action. Help educate Ben and school leaders, principals on what ethnic studies is with the resources I shared with you. And when I share the link to the video, I'll make sure I share links with all the resources as well. And then the other ask is to really clean house, which is what Ben said he's going to do, right? Get the right people in the right positions so that we can incorporate ethnic studies without having it be an extra added cost. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.